Air, and we're live. How's it going, everybody? This is MUSICA ANALYTICA number 3, which is the music theory internet YouTube podcast live stream thing with my friends over at Sideways, 12 Tone, and 8-Bit Music Theory. And how's it going, everybody?
Yeah,
Hi.
can't complain.
Yo.
I mean, I can. My air conditioning's out, but besides that, can't complain.
Oh, that sucks. Aren't you in LA?
I am in LA right now. Yeah. It's not great.
Oh, man. Yeah, that would suck. But,
That's brutal.
So besides the hot summers, how's everybody's summer going? I guess, yeah, is it going well?
Yeah, I mean, I've been, just got back from traveling, so I had to. The last couple months have been like prepping basically for traveling constantly and working ahead. But like, I got videos out, so it was cool.
Where'd you go?
I went back east to visit family.
Oh, cool.
I got to see my mom, see my grandparents, just basic, family. You guys know what a family is. I don't have to explain that. But yeah,
Please do. I've been called an
so you
alien.
have these people who are
I'm going to
related you.
Wikipedia. I'll be right back.
Wikipedia family. Okay.
I can't let them know I'm an alien. Shit.
Oh, man.
Blowing my cover.
Somebody just turned into an alien right there. That was great.
Sweet.
Sweet.
That's why he
Okay.
can't show his face.
He's an alien. Kill him.
Can't let the lizard people know.
Yeah, so we were talking earlier about like what our topics for today are, and I think the topics there are two we were sort of batting back and forth. The first was I'll let Sideways break this news. Something about Hans Zimmer. What is the latest with Hans Zimmer?
So there's this little like hiccup in the film scoring world where Zimmer just announced that he's going to be working on Wonder Woman 1984, which is the sequel to Wonder Woman, which was a smash hit. Rightly so. Great movie.
Yeah.
But if I'm not mistaken, Zimmer came out saying that he didn't want to score superhero movies anymore. And then while I was working on my Wonder Woman video, I remember finding an article where he talks about how we need to have more like women in music and female representation, especially in film scoring. And Zimmer's got like a lot of sway over the film score world. So it's really interesting to see how he's stepping in to be the name on the film and how he's not maybe helping somebody else step up in the ranks, so to speak, because they just announced that they were having a female composer in Captain Marvel, which, if I'm not mistaken, is the first I'm going through my Rolex and looking at my movies. Yeah. I think that's the first like not white guy scoring Marvel.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Am I wrong? Like, chat, prove me wrong, because I could be sucking here.
Her name is Pinar Toprak, I think.
Yeah.
And you were saying that she, like worked under Hans Zimmer. I mean, like a big thing with a lot of the LA film scoring people is that they have these huge teams, from what I understand. And so apparently she was on.
So Zimmer runs this giant company called Remote Control, and if his name's not on it, it'll be somebody under him. And there's all kinds of resources and all sorts of stuff that goes into that song machine, I guess you could call it. But I'm looking at her Wikipedia page, and she worked with him or on Remote Control on like Pirates of the Caribbean, Last Samurai, and King Arthur. Or no, I'm misreading that. But she did work on the Superman prequel series Krypton and the Netflix original The Angel. It's cool to see film composers and TV composers kind of moving up, because that's how I think that's how Giacchino got his start. Is he worked on some video games and then he did like Lost, I want to say, and now he's like everywhere.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I'm like looking at this right now. I mean, you're definitely the film composer guy in this group. But but I mean, I was saying earlier, like, this is the first time I didn't even realize it, but the first time that I've ever seen like a major film score written by like a female composer. Like, there's very, very few who are working, and so it's kind of cool. That's interesting. Sweet. Yeah, so
I'm excited for Captain Marvel. I love to see what Marvel's going to do with Avengers 4.
Yeah. Oh, the cat's meowing, and he apparently is very interested in that too.
I mean, cats love Marvel. What can I say?
Yeah. They do.
Yeah.
My cat does. Anyway, so another thing that we were going to talk about was the music literacy article, or music illiteracy article that was like making the rounds.
Oh, I have seen this everywhere, but I haven't actually read it. Can someone give me a brief synopsis?
Yeah, ditto.
So the
Okay.
brief synopsis is Oh, it's in the chat in the Hangout, but the brief version is people used to know music, now no one knows music, and pop music is bad, and science has proven it. That's the one sentence version of the entire argument.
Nice.
And there's it's the same thing you see dragged up every once in a while, where it's just like, oh, we've done this scientific study that analyzes these specific parameters and found that they've gone downhill over time in popular music, and it's like, well, yes, but different parameters have gone up. It's just you can't. But anyway, that's the basic thrust of it. They also there's this one sentence in there that just like as like a former like singer and lyricist and everything drives me crazy. It just let me see if I can do this from memory. They analyzed used some metric which analyzed the complexity of the lyrics and how good they are and how hard they are to understand, as if those are the same thing.
Oh.
Or even
What?
It's
like
just
a reading grade.
yeah,
level
exactly. It's just like, oh, the reading level. Yeah, effectively,
okay.
it's the reading level has shifted downwards, so the words are easier to understand and thus worse. So that's.
Yeah, the thing that really bugs me about that article is, I mean, it's saying that pop music is terrible, and then it compares it to like the music of John Coltrane, and John Coltrane practiced 9 hours a day, therefore it's objectively better. Okay, the cat is. I'm sorry about the cat. So, like my cat was saying, John Coltrane is objectively better, but pop music is essentially folk music. Everybody loves folk songs, and you wouldn't complain about the state of music about, you wouldn't complain Twinkle Twinkle Little Star is a very popular song, and that's like indicative of like the decline of Western civilization or something like that. People, they fill different roles in our social, like how we relate to one another. And I just found this article very disingenuous because it appeals to a very elitist sort of sensibility, an elitist sensibility that everybody wants to appeal to. Everybody wants to feel like they're cultured and wants to feel like they are in the know and like they are superior to another person, without actually going through the understanding the material that they're working with. Because this person in this article, this music literacy article, cites the study that's been cited about 1 trillion times, which was a bunch of people did this timbral analysis of pop songs from the past 100 years or so, and found that music is becoming more homogenous because of the timbre of the pop songs, of the recorded pop songs since like the 1960s. And that might be true, but that is just one metric for finding it. And it's also a study that kind of came in with an agenda. And they're kind of trying to prove that the timbre has been narrowed since the 1950s and 1960s in recorded music. And of course, none of this is discussed in the article. And the person writing the article is not a musician, not a musicologist, not a composer. They're a financial analyst who is a, quote, amateur musician.
That's fascinating.
And which is fine. Amateur musicians can have opinions too, and informed opinions too. But there's something that rubs me very much the wrong way when you have somebody in that position looking down at other people.
Especially because if you get access to the platform by being an expert in one thing, and then use that access to talk about things you're not an expert about, I think, like I said, like you said, I totally agree that like non-musicians, non-expert musicians, people who don't have degrees, are totally allowed to have opinions. I don't want to sit here and be like, the four of us have better music opinions, because we have more informed ones than a lot of people, but like that doesn't make us, the arbiters of what is and isn't good music.
Sure,
like, if you're a financial analyst, like I can't go on a website and be like, I'm a music theorist, let me publish articles about finance. They'll be like, no, you don't know that, stop. But like with music, like it's very easy. And there's no disclaimer anywhere before the very bottom of the article with the author description that this is not a music expert. This is not someone who knows everything, who necessarily has studied the corpus and done whatever. I like to use the word corpus. It's a fun word.
Oh man, it makes you sound so smart.
Yeah, it's such a A+ word. But yeah, no, there's no indication before you get to the very end that this is not like a musicologist, that this is not an actual like academic music expert who has studied the field. It's just someone with an opinion, and it's presented as if it's factual.
But isn't that most of punditry anyway? Most people just having opinions and being really good at having opinions.
Yeah.
That's.
I mean,
true.
isn't that an argument though? Is having an opinion and then it's supporting your opinion, right?
True.
Or am I going off the deep end?
No. I mean, no, that is what an argument is. Yes. That's a fair point.
I think it's like that stuff is interesting to me, like that research, like just taking for example the lyric thing. Like having a list of like these artists have the most complex lyrics by like whatever standard. I think that's interesting. Like that's fun to know. But it's just like that's not necessarily a good argument for like the music is better. You know what I mean?
Or
so
even
it's all
necessarily
about
the
how
lyrics.
he presents the information.
Like, is he arguing that a greater diversity of music within a specific genre is what determines a good or bad genre? It's so poorly defined. It's really tough to kind of figure out what he's arguing.
I mean, one thing that I don't remember if this is in that article or if this is something that came up. I know it's come up in other articles too, but in where they talk about sort of the reduction in orchestration variety, where they talk about like we used to have like all these different instruments, and now it's reduced to like guitars, bass, piano, drums, and computer. And it's like computer is not one instrument. Like a lot of the time they're like we have these like all these computer sounds, and that's just one thing. And it's like no, that's like all the things, all the noises you can make with computers.
I love that argument because it really kind of shows how people don't get how much things have stayed the same. Like how as much as things change, things stay the same over the years. Like I get that you think that there's a lot of very similar kind of music, but have you ever sat down and looked up how many piano sonatas there are? Like we just sat down and tried to be like, hey, all of these piano pieces have the exact same structure. That's so strange. Music back then must have sucked.
Oh man, that's such a good argument too.
That's a great point.
Like, dude, you want to hear about Gregorian chant? It was the same for like 500 goddamn years.
And the thing is that we only get the best of those styles of music. Confirmation bias, like we have the best, and like, oh, of course all music back then was great, but there were, consider how many composers were working at the same time Beethoven was. There were a lot.
Like 5.
At least 5, and we only know of him. And that's, because of the digital age, we can distribute everything. Everybody sees everything all the time, and so, we only get the best, which is great. We get the best, and
it's the digital age, but it's also like the time sieve thing. Like as things go, we just discard things. Like it's not just like Beethoven's time; it's like the 70s. If you go back to the 70s and look at what was like the top of the charts, a lot of it is shit we've never heard of. Like like songs we've never seen because they weren't actually that good, or they didn't have much good is subjective, blah, blah, blah.
Lasting power is probably the better way
to
say it.
They didn't have sort of lasting power that's sort of sustaining. They didn't sustain because they weren't like worth holding on to necessarily.
They didn't have the cultural impact.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they... what's at the top? What's at the top of the charts now is... Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just read this sentence in this article. Okay, so the first sentence is fine. I mean, I disagree. Today's pop music is largely the same, with a combination of keyboard, drum machine, and computer software, greatly diminishing the creativity and originality. It's a terrible statement, but whatever. This is my favorite, though. Pitch has also decreased. Pitch has also decreased, with the number of chords and different melodies declining. The number of chords declining.
Oh my god, the chords are vanishing! What are we gonna do? Quick, someone bolt down a major 13 sharp 11, and we don't want it to go.
This guy not allowed to use E flat minor anymore.
This guy clearly has not heard of Jacob Collier, but I just love that statement. The number of chords declining. Okay.
God,
that's a really bad way to word that, man. That sucks.
Yeah.
Okay. There's so much of this that I'm like, ugh.
You feel bad because you kind of want to, like, you see this every once in a while, like especially online, where you're trying to talk to somebody, and for whatever reason, the medium that they've choose to communicate with you, the medium that they've chosen to use to communicate with you, like email, IM, or something, they can't fucking get the thoughts out into your head the way they need to, and you kind of want to like sit down with them and be like, okay, in your own words, be as crass as you want, what the shit are you talking about? And this is kind of one of those moments where it's like you feel like he's got a really good idea, but he just wasn't able to put it into words the way he wanted to.
Yeah, and it also, in the beginning of it, it's like we were saying earlier, the thesis of this thing was something that I think is very, very worthwhile. The thesis is the tragic decline of music literacy. that's fine, because music literacy, I feel like, actually has decreased a lot in terms of the ability to read sheet music, the ability to think critically about music in general. It maybe not decreased, but there used to be a different way that people did this. Pianos were in most homes, like most people at least learned how to read sheet music in schools. All of that has kind of changed, at least in America. And I think, it would be better if more people were more musically literate, knew what a major scale was, at least some very basic sorts of things. And, people are being able to teach themselves that, which is great. But in terms of systemized approach to music education, that's kind of not been the case. So that's true, and I can maybe get behind that argument. And there's a lot of different things that I would agree with that maybe thesis. But that is not really what is being argued. And, the argument matters. Like what, your points do matter. And like the sentiment's fine, but, you want to back it up and you want to finesse it a little bit so it becomes a little bit more than just a headline that people share. And I feel like people just shared that headline without reading through the article as much.
Yeah, like the title doesn't feel like the thesis. The title feels like a piece of evidence he's trying to use to point toward his thesis that he thinks pop music or a lot of what he's listening to on the radio isn't fun for him.
Yeah.
And so that's a way more interesting question to ask.
Oh.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I feel like you see that sentiment a lot of like, oh, pop music sucks now and it used to be good. And I mean, like, that must be...
Well, it's golden age thinking. Like every generation has always thought that the good old days were so much better.
Music back in my days needed musicians.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it's like, I don't know, just the fact that it's so predominant, even among young people, I feel like there must be something about it that's true. Like there must be some actual problem with pop music or like some valid complaint, but just no one seems to be able to articulate it well,
Yeah, I mean, there is like a balance between poptimism, like pop optimism, being like all pop is great and all pop is terrible. I think there is a way of validly critiquing it, but I also think that the job of the music theorist isn't to give the good or bad for it. It's to, analyze it, figure out what's going on and why certain music is working the way that it does. So that's usually where I'm coming from, honestly. That said, as Adam Neely, the consumer, I probably am not going to consume most pop music for a variety of reasons, but I feel like there's different ways of segmenting that, that sort of like idea sentiment, though.
Yeah.
Like,
sorry.
Go ahead.
No,
I was going to say, like anything, there's a degree of nuance to it. Okay.
Yeah. To the point of like, sort of nuance? Why? But to the point of like, whether there's something going on or some legitimacy, I think part of what might be driving that is market segmentation. Because if you go back to like the 60s, like when the Beatles were being the Beatles, like there wasn't a lot of ways to distribute mass media music, and so you have these superstars because like labels want to invest in superstars and they pump up the Beatles, and you don't necessarily have as many other options. But today we have so many different available tools because it's so easy to distribute your own music and so easy to do that without a label, without like a budget, basically, that like you get a lot of people who listen to stuff that is new music, that is still like in popular genres, but isn't top 40 or isn't, or isn't whatever other genre they're complaining about. So you have a lot more segmentation of what the youth, God, listen to me.
The youth.
28, Jesus. But what kids and teenagers can listen to, what they have access to, and so they can form more nuanced opinions about what's available to them because there are more options. So I think that might be part of it, in addition to questions about whether the actual music has changed.
I literally just finished a book talking exactly about what you're talking about, how there's this like, I think the word stratification, that might not be the right word, but how there's instead of just one massive population dealing with a bunch of like micro populations, like 8-bit will know what do gamers like, all right? And I'm looking at from the film composition world, what do film scores want? And it's called The Song Machine Inside the Hit Factory by John Seabrook, and it's talking about how like online distribution, you'd think there's going to be a bunch of smaller pop stars, but we still see like top of the charts #1 hits, and it's kind of amazing to see. Like BTS just dropped a new track today, and it's already #1 on YouTube trending.
Oh, dang, I got to check that out.
Nice.
Hold on.
It's called Idol.
I'm such a...
So yeah, you should check that book out. It's really great. You're a BTS fan?
Well, no, I'm just I'm so fascinated by the phenomenon of K-pop, and I know nothing about it, but I just like.
Okay, well, let me recommend to you another book. I've just got it sitting on my desk. It's called The Birth of Korean Cool, and I don't know how to pronounce her name. It's Euny Hong, Hong.
Okay, Birth of Korean Cool.
Uni, I think it is.
Cool, yeah, I'll definitely check that out.
Her book kicks ass. It's a great book.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing is like it feels like it's almost accelerating the ability to like create or manufacture like the number one hit.
Yeah.
Psy.
Like Gangnam Style.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which you think would not be a thing because of course we have infinite access to everything, and in fact we have algorithms designed to give us exactly what we want.
Well, beyond that, Psy is even more anomalous because he exists, if I'm not mistaken, he exists outside the world of the manufactured massive corporate K-pop machine. He's kind of like this rebellious figure, and he was the one who got international fame pretty much before any other massive K-pop group like BTS or Girls' Generation or another K-pop band here.
It's weird because it's the parody of the K-pop became international before K-pop.
Yeah,
Which
exactly.
it's crazy. But now we're here. Now BTS has made a name, so in the US anyway. So that's cool. Cool. So I guess maybe we should get some questions from the chat, I guess. I don't know. Unless anybody has any other pressing news or anything. So I guess we're going to take a question or two from the chat. Let's find a chat question. Play the lick.
They have to be good, guys. They got to be good questions.
Yeah. No.
Play the lick. That's not a thing.
Like the notes of an A major chord, really hard stuff. Is rock the new jazz? Ooh.
Oh, Rick Beato just released a video, or maybe he's still live streaming this video about rock being the new jazz. I haven't watched it yet, but I saw the thumbnail. Is rock the new jazz, though? Do we have any thoughts on that?
What does that even mean?
Yeah, that's my first thought. Is
institutionalized, not part of the mainstream, and not particularly culturally relevant and relegated.
Wait, is that
to...
what you think jazz is, or what?
Yeah, not culturally relevant and relative. Yeah, I know it's my world right now, but yeah, institutionalized, not part of the mainstream, and more specialized. In other words, in order to play it, you have to be really dedicated to that one sound.
Like
that's
prog
my
rock music degrees kind of thing?
Yeah, basically. I bet you that will be a thing if it's not already a thing.
I can't wait to see hip hop degrees. That'd be cool.
That's gonna happen. That's definitely gonna happen.
I have a degree in flow performance. Fuck, that'd be sick.
Oh yeah, awesome.
At Berkeley, they actually now have electronic digital instrument as a
Nice.
as a, what do they call it?
Like a performance degree?
Yeah, well, you can't get a performance degree, but you can declare it as your principal instrument. So like,
You can't get a performance degree at Berkeley?
no, in electronic digital instrument. Although you might, I don't know. I honestly don't know. I'm not Berkeley. I'm not at Berkeley right now.
No, like, damn, that's way different from
Yeah. It's just in Adam is not Berkeley.
Oh God.
It's a really good distinction to make.
Yeah. So that's my take on is rock the new jazz. What does anybody else have anything? Or?
It's definitely not mainstream anymore. So in that respect, sure.
I mean,
I think so.
It doesn't feel like it's moving in an academic direction, though, is the thing for me.
Yeah.
Like that's sort of the main thing that's feels like. And I know if you look back historically, jazz wasn't always an academic darling either, but it doesn't feel like rock is moving in that direction. It feels like it's still very much. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but you know what I mean.
Well, when did the first jazz programs hit universities?
I think that was the
actually
70s.
relatively recently.
Like the
Was
70s,
that
I want
it
to say?
long ago? Okay.
Yeah,
I
it
know
was
up in
the
Canada,
70s.
our first jazz degree came 10 years ago, I think, or something pretty recently.
Wow.
So-
Well,
Okay.
isn't jazz really American?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Is that why?
What was it at Humber or McGill, or do you know where that was? Anyway, I was just curious.
10
Curious.
years ago.
Yeah, curious
Not
where
10
it was.
years ago, 20 years ago now.
Yeah. It's hard to keep stuff after 2000 organized in my head, you know.
Yeah.
Well,
It's I heard it came 10 years ago 10 years ago now, I think. And I just held that fact in my brain for...
Time doesn't move.
It's interesting you said, it's interesting you said that like rock is not being academized, because the way that Jeff Berlin, the curmudgeonly jazz bass player, says is that jazz is better than rock for the Academy. It's because it's more, there's more academic theory that you can learn and is more applicable to the style of music than rock. Like you can learn a bunch of musical theory analysis, you can learn all of that, but that's not all going to be immediately applicable to the performance of rock and roll. The same way that,
Sorry, so like you're saying like rock is a subset of jazz. Everything you learn in jazz you can apply to rock, or everything you learn in rock you can apply to jazz, but not everything you learn in jazz you can apply to rock.
I guess, yeah. His whole thing is like, in order to like improvise in jazz music, you need to know scales, you need to know chords, you need to know all that stuff. You don't really need to, in the same way, like immediate way, to play rock music. That's his argument. I'm not sure if I buy it, but that's the reason, according to him, why rock hasn't been like a school, like an academized. I'm making up words by this point.
Academification.
I like that.
Yeah, I like it. It works. Let's go with it.
So then I guess the question is, what does rock do that's unique that you can't get from jazz or from any other genre of music that necessitates it being included in academia?
I would say tone and recording technology, the relationships of guitar tone, recording technology, and how all of those fit together in like what a hypothetical rock degree would be.
Like a digital signal processing kind of component sort of thing?
Maybe, yeah.
I also think as like someone who has a background in, I'm not like hardcore academic rock, but like studying rock, I think that the performance aspect of it is also noteworthy. Just the way that it approaches energy and emotion and communication and those sorts of things is importantly different from, and that's not to say that jazz doesn't have emotion or energy or anything like that. I mean, that's a separate, no, I'm not going to argue that, but
most jazz students I meet seem pretty dead.
But no, it's just like there's a lot of, I think it's harder to understand rock without understanding the live actually no, because it's a different aspect of the live performance, not like, I don't know, because it's sort of like, to draw an analogy, to move to a separate area, when I look at like hip hop and rap music, like it's very hard to analyze that stuff without looking at the lyrics because they're so ingrained in what the music is in a way that in a lot of other genres they're not. And with rock, I feel like the performance and the energy and of that is, again, very integral to the music itself in a way that you don't necessarily find in other genres. So that might be something that I think could set rock apart in sort of academic study.
So almost like a theater degree. In other words, how to communicate with your body and with your presence on a stage. That might be interesting. There are performance technique classes at Berkeley. I know that. And I feel like there are some other performance technique classes at other schools.
Wait, you got classes on how to behave on stage?
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So, So level with me. Is this like an easy A or you're never going to pass?
I have no idea. I didn't take it, so I don't know how to behave on stage.
But no, when I was doing my juries for like my degree, like my private instructor was a jazz guy.
I just had a flashback when you said jury. I'm sorry.
Sorry. Yikes. Apologies to anyone in chat. But anyway, my private instructor was a jazz guy, and I'm very much, like I said, a rock guy, and rock and metal and stuff like that. So I knew how to perform and how to behave in those and what to do when someone was taking a solo. You know, you run around the stage, you headbang, you whatever, you're still moving. It's still a part. Everyone has to be moving and doing stuff. And so like I go to my private instructor, and it's like, okay, I know in these jazz songs what to do while I'm singing. I said, I can handle that. What do I do when someone's soloing? And what he says is you just look at them and you listen and you count. It's just like...
There is an etiquette, yeah. And it's always kind of sad, the etiquette. You just sort of stay there and you like maybe throw in a or something like that if you're feeling really good. Yeah.
But it's just like it's not a part of that in the same way.
But I mean, the thing is like people, this is a big part of musical performance. People hear with their eyes. For any genre of music, it's probably especially rock music, but you know, if you're not putting on a show, you know, people like to think of music as this thing removed from everything else, like it should just be about the sound, and it never is. That's just not how we humans are designed. So
that's the total opposite of what happened in my school.
Oh, is it? Yeah.
Yeah, like when
Well, yeah.
when we had piano performances where like the whole studio would come together and be one big recital, all the students would sit on the right side of the concert hall and all the parents would sit on the left side, because on the left side the parents could see the kids playing the piano on the keys, and on the right side we were at the perfect angle for the soundboard to bounce off the lid and hit our ears.
Huh.
So there's this like channel right in the middle of the auditorium where nobody sat.
Interesting.
It's
Interesting.
fantastic.
It's like, this sounds so much better right here underneath the balcony. Oh god, the acoustics are phenomenal. It's like, fuck, love being pretentious. It's awesome.
Well, there's an interesting article where somebody said like they analyzed piano competitions, and they analyzed to see if like people could judge what the if people could figure out how the judges judge the piano competitions just based on watching the video of the piano competitions, not listening to the recording, just watching the video of the pianists performing. And they were able to get it right most of the time, just purely based on how the pianists were like just throwing themselves at the piano, which I found really interesting because we typically think classical music, high and mighty, like it should be all about the art, but really the performance matters a lot, which is I think kind of interesting.
I mean, I would be a little hesitant to draw causal relationships there, just because people who are more emotionally invested in the playing physically are often going to play better. There's not a one-to-one correlation. I'm not gonna, but it's sort of if you're putting your heart and soul into it, that's going to come across in your playing, and it's going to come across in your body. Is what I was trying to say there. Words are hard, But yeah, I think that I'm not sure that I would necessarily, like I said, draw a causal relationship, but it reminds me of, so I'm going to go into like reality television here for a second, but The Voice, when that first came out, as a singer, I was really interested in it because they had blind auditions. So the judges, I assume everyone here has seen commercials for The Voice at some point, but just in case, the judges sit in chairs that are facing away from the stage, and so all they can do is hear. And then they have to decide whether they want that person on their team. And I thought that was really cool. And then they get into the later parts and they start like doing performance, and I sort of felt like I wasn't as into it then, but like I just thought it was a really cool idea to have like blind auditions for like a reality competition show where it's about your voice and it's about nothing else, because they can't see anything else. They don't know what you look like. They don't know what your movements are.
Does the audience get to see the performer?
Yeah.
Or?
Yeah, it's just the judges, because the audience gets to be But yes.
That wouldn't be good television to.
Yeah.
No, that's what I'm asking. It's like, I wonder.
Yeah, just like a minute and a half close up of Adam Levine's face.
Has there ever been any like dissonance there where the audience really liked somebody but the judges didn't because the audience liked the way the person looked and the judges weren't there to evaluate that?
I'm not.
I haven't watched it in a long time. I watched like the first season and then sort of fell off. But like, I don't remember that happening. But I remember there being some people that I thought were really cool that the judges didn't turn around for. So maybe.
Huh.
But
it's interesting. I mean, this has nothing to do. I mean, like the first time I heard of the concept of voice, I thought the same thing. Like, oh, that's really cool. But the way that they edit those shows is such. That I forget who I was watching. I was on some sort of like binge watch YouTube, clicking on random things as one does.
Yeah.
But
YouTube
like,
adventures.
Yeah, YouTube adventures.
I love
like,
those.
Like Wikipedia adventures, but less edifying.
Like, let's go, YouTube algorithm. Show me what you got.
All right, why I'm on this, I don't know, but it's entertaining. Good job, Ender. But somebody was saying like, those reality TV shows aren't about the people who are performing; they're about the judges, in terms of how they're edited, they're cut together in a way.
Yeah.
Which I found really fascinating because you assume that you're watching these shows to tell the story of these people on the stage, but it's never that. Just watch one of these shows again. It's always about how the judges are reacting to things, which is why on The Voice, it's all about how the judges turn around. You never remember any specific person on The Voice. You remember that it's Adam Levine, Blake Shelton.
The other two have changed a lot over the years.
Pharrell was on it, maybe?
Pharrell was on it at one point, yeah. Miley Cyrus was on it at one point, I think.
Yeah, so you remember that. You don't remember the audio or the participants. And, it reflects, I have some friends who have been on The Voice or at least auditioned for The Voice, and it's not something that you really want to spend your time on if you're trying to actually make a career with it.
Yeah.
I just found that interesting, yeah.
It's definitely, it's also just like really low odds too if you're going to invest your, like my uncle back when I was again doing like serious singing stuff, he was watching The Voice and he was like, Corey, you should audition for it. And I was like, I mean, I could send in a tape, but I'm not going to invest a lot of time into this because, you know, even if I do get on, people won't remember me, but also what are the odds that I get on? Like, even if I'm really good, like there's so many really good singers out there and
so
just,
much
like,
of it's out of your
odds,
control.
Yeah, the odds of making that. But yeah, it makes a lot of sense what you were saying, just because those are sort of the judges and whatever are the, I guess, the sort of recurring characters, if you look at it from a narrative perspective. Because they're, you know their personalities. You know, like if we think of American Idol, we think of like Simon Cowell being a dick. We can think of Paula Abdul being nice. We think of Randy Jackson also being nice.
Yo, dog.
You get this sort of you have that sort of trio in your head, and their behaviors are what you think about when you think of American Idol, even though none of them have been on it for a long time.
God,
Does that show still exist? I don't remember, but
yeah, I think
anyway.
I don't know.
I think it was ending recently.
It ended recently.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Nobody cares.
Yeah, because I was on like a flight recently back to LA. No, I think this is their last season now is what's happening. Because I was on a flight back to LA, and it was Hollywood Week. Was the week that they were the people were had done with auditions and they were going to Hollywood for the main competition, and like the flight I was on had like sold ad space for the flight, so they just had like people like on the flight trying to hype us up about American Idol and getting like footage that they could use in the thing. And they passed around like they had to get like waivers, and like they came to me and I was just like, I didn't want to be in it anyway, but I was like no, I can't, I work in social media and I have to control my image, which was a good excuse, but really I just didn't want to be in their goddamn
That's
footage.
why you don't show your face.
Oh man, you're smart.
None of you know how many times you've seen me shirtless. And I can prove it.
A shirtless alto clef. Worst thing ever. That's smart though. I'll use that. I'll use that the next time somebody does that, because
it makes sense for you. Yeah, because you show your face. I was just making shit up.
Well, and also like well, whatever. What was I? There was something in this. Oh yeah, I have some friends who have the audition part for those shows is really interesting because they have these things called industry auditions where they basically find people that they want on the show and they kind of like squeeze them in, regardless of whether or not they go for the open auditions, because they need to have like certain controls, which are like, these are the good singers. And then they have like, these are the entertainment people that we're going to laugh at. Yeah. It's so,
God, it's so mean.
Yeah.
It's very mean, but and the question is like, are these shows, they might at one point have been like necessary, but people now see that like there's YouTube stardom is now such a huge thing. There's Instagram stardom. There's Musical.ly stardom, which is the weirdest thing.
Man, I can't stand
I
that.
just found out about that like 2 days ago.
Shit.
Still not super sure what it is. I've never looked into it.
It's just lip syncing, right?
It's lip syncing, and then also like lip syncing to famous, like lip syncing scenes from movies is now a thing apparently. Oh God. Anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
To
but it's
tie
all
us
like
back to.
Sorry. No, it's I just
I was,
was complaining about Musical.ly. It's not.
We
that
got
big
way
a deal.
off track. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say to tie us back a little bit to music literacy. Do you guys remember when, or were you aware at all of American Idol when Harry Connick Jr. came on as a?
Yes. Yes.
No.
I actually watched that or like part of that season, and it was so funny.
the pentatonics bit. I saw that.
Yeah,
clip.
the
Pentatonics bit. Man,
Boy,
that was
fill me in. What happened? What's up? What's going on?
So he said the word pentatonic, and one of the other judges called him out on it for being super fancy.
Jennifer Lopez did not know what a pentatonic scale was, and she asked him.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it was just the way that it was done was like really funny, and it caused like this whole like thing, like oh my god, pentatonic scale. And it was an interesting thing altogether because for the I forget what it was, but like the show where they were doing Great American Songbook like songs, Harry Connick Jr. was, that's his whole like vibe is like the jazz standards or whatever. And everybody was doing all these riffs over every song, and he really didn't like that sound. He really hated that because that's not what you typically do. You want to sing like a jazz standard as straight as possible. But I thought that was an interesting like my world, the jazz world kind of being thrown at American Idol and being awkwardly paired in a very weird way.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Speaking of Harry Connick Jr., this is completely unrelated to anything else we've been talking about, I think. I could sort of tie it to music literacy if I wanted to. But basically, there was a clip running around. You guys might have seen this. If not, I'd look it up. It's great. But he was taking a solo, and the audience was clapping along like they do, and they were clapping on the 1 and the 3 because, they're a general audience, and that happens a lot. So instead of stopping and telling them to stop or anything, because he can't do that, he's playing his solo in 4, and then he stops, or he keeps going, and he plays 1 bar of 5, and then he just keeps going. So suddenly, because they keep clapping half notes, but suddenly that shifts that onto 2 and 4, and it's you can see the shot, and there's his drummers in the background, and his drummer obviously knows exactly what happened.
The drummer's going like that, yeah.
It's a fantastic. It's so subtle, it's so smooth, and it works great, and then suddenly they're doing it correctly, and it's awesome. But yeah, unrelated to anything else. But
Is there a YouTube clip of that? Could you send it to me?
Oh yeah,
I'll look it up.
It's called French rhythm accents because he's playing to a French crowd and they're clapping on 1 and 3, and not that French people clap on 1 and 3, but as humans, as uneducated humans, we sometimes do that, and it's called French rhythm accents with Harry Connick Jr. And
I found it.
It is glorious.
It's beautiful. I love it.
Yeah,
and it's so respectful too. It's not, it's not being a dick about it. It's not anything. It's just making the audience right. It's great.
Yeah. Somebody just complained this MUSICA ANALYTICA is not much analytical. Well, I mean, we just analyzed 5/4 and how you can switch the beat around in 5/4. That is analytical. I guess we're talking much more like general music theory or music culture. But
that's true.
That's what music theory is, though, right? It's just finding patterns and shit that people like.
Yeah.
So if people like American Idol and we sit here and try to figure out why people like American Idol, that's still music theory.
I find that more interesting most of the time than getting too in the weeds about chord progressions.
I love the weeds, but...
Well, the weeds are great, but you have to go really deep for me to really get into it, tuning theory and really weird stuff. For analyzing chord progressions, they're not that many. And bring it back around.
Bach just doesn't cut it for you anymore.
Oh, Bach's great, but according to this article, to bring it back to the tragic decline of music literacy, pitch. What did he say? Pitch has also decreased with the number of chords and the different melodies declining. So,
Yeah. Yeah, but one thing on that, since we jumped back to that article that I sort of had wanted to mention and forgot, but is that I think that I agree with the idea that music literacy has sort of gone down and that could be better. But I think that often the article certainly misemphasizes where the problem areas of that are, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think there's a big emphasis on reading music and sight reading and stuff like that. And to be honest, if you're not a session player, if you're not a working, gigging musician, sight reading isn't really that valuable a skill. And reading is, it's useful, and I read music in my job, but my job is music theorist, so it's not a super applicable skill directly. Whereas I think sort of if I were to advocate for one type of music literacy that I think a lot of people could benefit from in their everyday lives, it would be what I would call orchestral listening. So being able to listen to a song and pick out individual parts instead of just hearing an entire cohesive whole. I think that is a really valuable skill for listening to and appreciating music without needing to be making music, whereas reading, sight reading, those sorts of things are only actually valuable skills to most people if they are going to be musicians, if they're going to be working musicians or practicing musicians or something like that.
I would definitely agree with the idea of some form of ear training being the most important thing. Just being able to listen to something and understand what you're hearing, rather than, reading sheet music I think is important, or at least understanding some degree of what a major scale is, because that's an easy way. It's an easy way to get into making your own music. And
this is literally my next video.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah, this is we're literally talking about my next video. It's I literally just had to do this, and I just sang for half an hour.
I'll stop. I'll let you.
No, it's cool. It's cool. By all means, keep going. But it's you worked a major scale, and then you start picking out those different solfege syllables, and you put them into your own melodies, and then you can listen to those on the radio. And
that's great. That's all very important, and it's applicable to any style of music. And I think one of the best things about like the past 10 years is creating your own music has become easier and easier and easier through GarageBand or like any sort of apps on your phones. Creating music is actually very easy. You don't need to know music theory in order to create music, and that's fantastic. It would be great if there was a greater degree of music literacy so that you could contextualize what you're doing a little bit more, and so you could feel a little bit freer to create beyond the confines of like a simple app. I think that would be amazing. And, I think I was talking, I have a friend who works, I think the company's name is Soundfly. He was like developed a course on music theory that just, I haven't seen the course, but I was talking to him. He developed a course on music theory that just used the piano roll, and not like any form of like music notation. It was all piano roll based music theory. And I think that's great because that's a much more applicable way of interacting with music that more people have now with digital audio workstations. I think it's just like finding the switch now from just making sure that people are a little bit more familiar with the like the nuts and bolts of music. I think that's important.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, the thing that gets me about music education and when people emphasize it is they're always like, "Hey, I'm studying music in school. Now studies show that my SAT score will go up 10 points." And it's like that's like completely missing the point.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the music equals means for another end, which I hate. The thing that I'm finding more and more recently is that the way that at least education here in the United States works is that that's how music is pitched for music and art and dance and theater. That's pitched to like music administrators. Not as much for athletics, which if you think about how music teaches discipline, technique, skill, focus, etc., these like basic human traits that we would want. Mm-hmm. Athletics is very much in the same realm. Athletics teaches certain values the same way that music teaches these values. Right. But athletics is never a means to an end. It's always like considered just a thing that you must have for the betterment of the students, which is great. And I think that's important. I think it's also important for music and the arts for the same reasons. So that's my pitch for music education. Sorry.
Have you guys read, there's an essay by a guy called, I think, Paul Lockhart, called A Mathematician's Lament. I may have recommended this on a previous stream. I recommend it a lot. But it's about math. It's not about music, but it's in that same vein, and it really informs a lot of the way that I think about a lot of this stuff. Just because it talks about basically the idea that when we pitch math to people and math to educators, it's the same thing where we're like, this is going to make you so much better at, balancing your checkbook, and it's going to make you so much better at this and this other thing. And it's like, no, it's going to make you better at math. That's valuable, and it's interesting, and it's like, and in the same way, like I think music, because he talks about sort of as an analogy, teaching music, but only like teaching notation and then having music, like actual playing music, be like a college level thing. And it's like, no, you have to make sure you can draw your treble clefs perfectly first and all that. And I think it's a really good paper about education and learning, and especially in like highly theoretical subjects for their own sake, for their own value, rather than sort of trying to extrapolate and attach them to other things. Yeah, I would recommend it to anyone.
I'm scanning this as you were describing it. It looks great. So I can't wait to read this off stream.
Yeah.
So that's amazing.
I'll just read it on stream right now. We'll wait.
Okay, we're gonna start to the stuff now. We'll let somebody else do that. That's awesome. Yeah, that is fantastic. Like it also speaks to how we value certain subjects, and I mean, music should be valued higher, I think.
Yeah.
I might be biased.
Yeah.
And it should be valued in different ways than it is currently. But
yeah.
Okay, so like in your ideal world, how would music be valued?
The same way that athletics is valued. And I mean, for like a means for its end, like something that should be self-evident, that you need students playing music the same way that you need students running around and learning how to play sports.
So like marching band finals instead of the Super Bowl.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say that necessarily. But just in terms of like the self-evident, the intrinsic nature, the intrinsic need for music for its own sake. as an expression of self, as an expression of humanity. And athletics is considered that. And I keep going back to that, and I don't think that's wrong at all. I think that's
a good
fantastic. I think that's fantastic, and necessary, but also for music.
I bet you that could come across, or like, I don't know if this is because of the way we teach music or what, but when you think of athletics, especially for kids in school, it's a very social thing, right? You're on a team, and you're learning how to play as a team. But then learning music, it's very sort of focused on yourself and like getting better and learning your scales and whatever, and that's obviously important. But it's just funny like when I started university and playing jazz in university, and I had played jazz all through high school, but university was the first time where I really got the sense of like all of you are collaborating on creating this piece of music together, and you're not just like reading your part off of a page, you know what I mean? So I feel like, I don't know, taking it off of the page more earlier and turning it into like a social thing where everyone's working together to achieve something. Yeah. It might be a better, it might make it easier to see the intrinsic value in being musical. I don't know.
Yeah, I definitely agree, because, historically music has always been a social activity, like especially on the folk level. Like, you get together with people and you sing a song, and maybe somebody accompanies or whatever. But, choral singing and like group singing has always been throughout history, every culture, that's always been a thing. So I think that idea, tying it more into the social aspect, I think if we're talking about the utilitarian pitch to school administrators, maybe that's a sort of thing, like civil duty, or I don't know, all the dumb things that you can probably appeal to. Teamwork, that's one.
No, I think because I switched schools between 6th and 7th grade, and in 6th grade I was at a relatively small school, and in our music we had like a voluntary, well, it was not voluntary, but opt-in band program that we could sort of be a part of if we wanted to, and I played the baritone horn at that point, so 12-tone used to play the baritone horn. But no, I mean I still have that horn. I just haven't played it since. Anyway, I'll get to that. But
play it for your examples. You should that'd be nice. Instead of MIDI,
deeply out of tune.
But like for all the guitar examples too.
Just the trooper.
That'd be great.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Multi-track yourself would be fantastic.
But no, but it's like, and we had the small music band that was like 6 or 7 of us, and we'd all just sort of get together with whatever instruments we played and basically mess around, and we'd just sort of decide what we were going to do, and the teacher was like very open and let us sort of, like I said, mess around and play what we wanted, and we could and then I went to change schools to 7th grade, and that school had a much larger band program in terms of number of students, and all it was they gave us these pieces that were already written, and we sight read or we read them. They gave us the written music, and we would go learn them, and then we would perform the written music we would perform our part, and all of us would perform our parts at the same time, so it would make a thing. And it's sort of, that was when I stopped. I quit that band, and I really haven't played baritone horn since, because it was just like rote memorization and performance, and it wasn't creative, it wasn't expressive, it wasn't fun in the way that I think music actually is. And it took me a long time to really come back to music after that experience, where I was like I was like, oh, actually this is a thing that I can do for fun, and I don't just have to like memorize this thing that someone gave me. So I think would be an important part of valuing music correctly. Oh my god.
There you go with your
the way that the way that I would want to value music, sort of if I got to design a music program for everyone, it would be much more based on experimentation and play, and not just because you need the rudimentary stuff. You need to know scales. You need to practice and do all that. I'm not saying don't practice, but like infuse experimentation and infuse creativity in it from a very early point. Like I used to teach kids, and that was like very much my approach. I've been talking for a long time. I should let someone else say something. But
I had a really similar experience in school, where when I was in school growing up, it was constantly like private piano teachers, music classes in school. It was always just, here's Mozart, here's Beethoven, here's Bach. This is good. Don't ask questions. Play it and enjoy it. And I remember bunny hopping between like private piano teachers being like, this shit sucks and is boring, and I don't want to like spend precious video game time sitting in front of a piano playing a piece of music that I don't care about. And so the most I always learned when I taught myself was when I was looking up pieces of music and transcribing them in front of a piano myself, like fucking Final Fantasy VII, Mario, Zelda, all the video game stuff that was great back when I was a kid. And in breaking those down was when I learned the most about music at that time, where it's like, hey, they keep skipping a note in the left hand, and now I have this triad form. What is this? Oh my goodness. And I never got that from just playing the music over and over again. They figured it was like programming, like you were reading code and just doing exactly what it said instead of actually thinking about what put it together.
Yeah, I mean, that sense of discovery was definitely, I mean, for me, it was like I was in piano lessons. Parents put me in piano lessons when I was like 8 or 9. I hated every second of it. I mean, I don't want to say I hated every second of it, but like I loved when I could play fast things after I practiced and was like forced to practice for like years on end. Solfeggietto, CPE Bach, I can still remember how to play that. It sounds very impressive, and for like an 11-year-old me, it was like, oh my god, this is so cool. But most of it I hated because like obviously the music that I was being forced to play was not super interesting. So it was only when I started playing bass guitar and I got to learn how to play Rage Against the Machine on my bass guitar, I was like, oh, this is cool. And like, what is this? Oh, this is an octave. Oh, okay, that's cool. And it's that sense of discovery that one actually feels when you're a kid. Like, I guess the point of the education would then be to try and get the kid to discover on their own, or at least get the kid engaged with what like they're working with, and then sneak.
Well, yeah, like the theory has to be applicable to what you're interested in, right?
Yeah, of course.
Because so many people are like, you're going to need to know calculus when you get older, and then everybody's older, and it's like, when the fuck do I need to work out a hypotenuse? Assholes.
Never learned calculus.
Always.
Is this ladder tall enough? No, get a taller ladder. That's it. And that's the only practical application of, you know what I mean?
Yeah. But I used to work with this one kid, again, back when I was teaching piano and voice, and like his whole thing, like every week he would be like, he was writing this one long song, and it was, I use the word song loosely. Like he was writing sections and being like, oh, I like this, I'm going to put it in my song. And it was like, it was his thing and he was making it. And it was like, if you would just play it, it sounds like a very weird experimental piece, but it was something that was his and that meant something to him. And I think from that perspective, it was really cool. And actually, this is the same kid that I showed like Steve Reich's Pendulum music to. And then he was super into that. And it was just like, that kid's going places. But like,
yeah. Wow.
It's just like, we would just sit at the piano and he'd like just play stuff and be like, I want to put this into my song, and I would write it down for him. And I hadn't gotten to teaching him music notation, so I'd just write it down in letters, and he'd be like, okay, cool. And he'd sort of worked out his own notation system that he could understand and follow along with quickly, and so we would just do that. But like that way, he had a song and he was writing music, and he'd been taking piano lessons for like a couple months. Like this wasn't like a kid who'd been doing stuff for years and was just sitting down and like playing, solfeggietto, or to pick a random example. But
totally random. Yeah.
Totally off the top of my head. I don't know where it came from. But no, but it was really cool, and it was really fun to work with because he was really passionate about what he was doing because he was making something. He wasn't just performing at a machine, he was creating his own art. And I think that's really important to get in from a really, really early stage.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about, to draw to athletics again, kids running around, kicking a ball, like just having fun, knowing loosely what the rules of the sport are. Kids are generally encouraged from the very beginning to just do that and like let their energy kind of run wild. I feel like that's not usually the case for music. Most of the time it's let's get down to business. And defeat the Huns. I just
totally. There's a lot of like, you got to learn your whatever scales. Yeah, you got to learn all this stuff.
Yeah, or you got to do this so you can be fancy, so we can have you play the piano when family comes over.
Yeah, that's a big thing. Let's have the fancy kid play the fancy chords and everybody go ooh and ah.
Yeah.
And the kid loves the attention, but they kind of hate the practice. Where
I hated both.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, assuming the kid is a prima donna like myself. But yeah, I mean, it should be the kid loves the practice. The kid loves the running around and kicking the ball around. The metaphorical. We're taking these analogies pretty far, but I love.
It's kind of like the cultural value of music, and this is kind of sort of the thing I don't understand, that people don't really take it to its extreme, where you look at a kid who spends all day practicing in front of a piano. It's like, oh man, that kid's gonna go places. Like, why? What is that kid doing that makes you think they're going to go places? What makes you think they're smarter? Like, if that kid gets a degree and practices the piano and gets a degree in practicing and performing piano, getting a job is still going to be extremely difficult for that kid, you know?
Yeah, that's true. I guess the idea of, like, it's a visual example of somebody, like, you associate practice with goodness. But that's not always the case. It's not instilling every value a person needs. You know, it comes down maybe to like a balance between what music is and like what the self is and all sorts of stuff. But that's a good point. I hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah, so it's what makes people think that music is like, has that kind of value, I guess.
Yeah, because as
it's
we
sort
all
of like
know,
being able to distinguish between wines. Like, if you can tell somebody what makes a wine good or not, that's great, but you're not going to make rent doing that unless you go to the absolute upper echelons, which is the exact same with the piano. If I walk around, I'm like, I got a graduate degree from Juilliard playing the piano, and that's like, oh, well, let's just throw money at that one. You know?
Well, it's interesting too, because Juilliard, classical piano. I think of Nare Soul. If you don't know Nare Soul, check out her channel. It is absolutely awesome. But she's a Juilliard classical pianist, and the reason why I know her isn't because she's a Juilliard classical pianist. It's because she's really good at making YouTube videos. You know, that's like a skill set that you didn't learn when you were a kid. It's the culmination of a lot of different things. Your interests, your, like, you know, each one of us has a particular voice that we found on our channel, and people know of us because of that, not because we practice piano a million times.
Did any of us take a video editing class in school? I know I didn't. My videos are goddamn PowerPoint presentations.
Yep.
No.
I taught myself Premiere by accident.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
right?
it's like everything is by accident. But, you know, maybe you can attribute that aspect, like the enterprising nature of like video editing and like learning Final Cut or learning whatever, to something in our past, but it wasn't sitting there and practicing the piano. Maybe it was, though, because it's maybe sitting there and practicing the piano is also requisite for this. Like, maybe there's a bunch of things that are necessary for this.
Yeah, it's true.
Not just the music, which is, you know, yeah, that's an interesting thought. I like that thought a lot.
Yeah, like if you can't sit down and work on something of your choosing for hours every day, you know, it doesn't matter what it is. You can't be a professional classical pianist or, you know, realistically a YouTuber. Well, I mean, maybe you can, I don't know, but you know, that practice it's not just learning piano, you know, it's learning how to have discipline right? And all that stuff.
Yeah.
All that good stuff, the discipline things. I saw a question earlier, sorry, just to bring it back to this, because orchestral, what was it? The orchestral
listening?
Orchestral listening, yes. Somebody asked a question about that. They asked, like, how do you train that? How do you train orchestral listening? I think that's an interesting question.
I mean, I think sort of transcription is a good way to practice that, to sort of like, or even like a lot of what I do, because in most of my work, I don't actually bother transcribing the things I analyze because transcriptions are out there, and I double check. But I do double check all of them.
You look at the tabs, yeah.
Well, yeah,
I do that too.
Yeah, it's just it saves so much time. But like, it's still like going through, what I'll do is I'll like program them up in MIDI and then play them along with the thing and listen for discrepancies. So being like, trying to listen to the bass part and trying to like transcribe the bass part is, I think, a good place to start, because that's not the top of the mix. That's not the hardest, like the brightest projecting like vocal line, whatever. But it's still, because it's usually the lowest part, like it would be weird if it wasn't, but since it has that sort of special place that you can sort of, it's not as hard to pick out necessarily. So I would recommend maybe trying to transcribe like a bass part to something, and then also just like listening to things and trying to isolate actively, trying to be like, what is the guitar playing? And just listen to that. And you don't even necessarily have to transcribe it. Just like try and tune out what the vocalist is doing, tune out what the drums are doing, tune out everything, and just listen to that guitar. And I don't know. That's what I do.
Yeah, I mean, for me as a bass player, like, it was very difficult in the beginning to hear the bass in every recording, because that's not where everybody's ear immediately goes. Just in transcribing. I mean, 8-Bit, you do like a lot of transcribing for all of your videos. I was just watching the Civ 5, Civ 6 video you did.
That was a great video.
Yeah.
That was amazing. I love that one.
You did a lot of transcription for that thing.
It was. Well, the thing was, I didn't do as much as probably it seemed like it did, because he actually, the composer, put the orchestral arrangements for download on his website for like $5 each, which is like
that's a steal.
amazing.
That's
that
great.
is awesome.
But,
Didn't he tweet your video too?
I think he did, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Which is
cool.
always-
Ass.
That's cool.
Yeah, I don't even know how to react to that, but
yeah, I mean, it's just like, for me, I think focusing on the bass first, since it's the hardest. It's like, whenever I try and do anything, I usually try and do the hardest thing first to get it out of the way. But
the bass also grounds it, I think. When
Yeah.
you're like if you have the bass down, and whatever, I always do melody and bass first, and then you have kind of a like, this is probably gonna be a C chord, so I'll check to see if it's a C chord, which is a lot easier for me than like, what is this? This could be anything, what's going on. So
Yeah. And I often find like the inner voice is harder than the bass, just because, the bass is that sort of structural fundamental thing that is, again, it's not as easy as a melody. Like melodies are the easiest transcription. I'm not here to argue otherwise, but like sort of the bass after that, I think, is probably for me one of the easier ones. Just again, it's easier to do that than like some random like guitar background line or something.
That's true, yeah. I mean, I think it's also because, and I've talked about this on my channel, the bass is below the human. The frequencies of the bass are below human speaking voice. So I've heard this a bunch of times. The tessitura of the human speaking voice ends up being like where our pitch perception is most accurate. Yeah. So anywhere below 250 hertz, our pitch perception kind of like drops pretty seriously, and that's like kind of the realm of most bass guitar, double bass, dubstep, wub bass. Any kind of bass like really is like below that. So I find that kind of interesting, and I've had people, I've tried, I've worked with people learning to transcribe, like for bass students. I've had people like pitch shift the entire thing, like the entire recording up, and you need the right like pitch shifting algorithm. But I've had people pitch shift everything up like a perfect fourth or a perfect fifth. Sometimes that is kind of weird, but it sort of works sometimes. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting. Sorry.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, so Fletcher-Munson curve, that's the thing. Somebody mentioned that. The Fletcher-Munson curve.
Oh, is that
Great,
like the frequency response of the human ear kind of thing?
Yeah.
I thought that was
like,
just a person.
Fletcher-Munson?
No, just Fletcher-Munson curve,
Oh, yeah.
Fletcher-Munson curve asked.
Fitty, Werben, Jagerman, Jensen?
I'd be into it. It's a good name. Someone go have that name, please.
Fletcher-Munson curve, yeah. Okay.
Put that on business cards.
Here's a question. What do you think of Jacob Collier? Do we have any strong opinions?
Oh, I did a video about him.
Oh, you did the
harmonic dualism one.
The dualism, yeah.
Yeah, and it wasn't super about him. It was inspired by him, and then like I was gonna do a video that was just like a brief look at a couple different things, because I was coming back from VidCon, and I was like, I don't want to do a bunch of research, so I'm just gonna do like pick these simple things, do like brief surface cover of like that, and like his sort of microtonal voice leading, and there was one other thing, I forget what. I was gonna do like, and I started researching the first one, which is the harmonic dualism, like his idea that like perfect fifths are major and perfect fourths are minor, and sort of looking at sort of the historical precedent of that idea, and it's just like this super intense like 19th century like decades long theory fight between just like a bunch of math
tuning
nerds
systems?
arguing about no it's not even tuning systems. It's just like the question is the minor chord effectively is the minor chord as fundamental as the major chord? So the minor and major triad.
The thing that I found interesting about that your video is the idea that in a minor chord the fifth is actually the root, and not the root.
Yeah,
like because it's like an inversion. To me, it was so fascinating the whole idea of like the harmonic dualism, like
Yeah.
major is going up, minor is going down. Like a minor chord is a major chord, but in perfect inversion. But why? That's the why.
I mean,
and I also was
yeah.
researching for one of my videos Hugo Riemann's stuff. The like his whole thing, way different than anything in apparently his stuff is super influential on German theory and like how theory is taught in Germany, which is apparently very different than the rest of the world. But I mean, I guess that's interesting, just how the concept of theory is like fundamentally different. But I guess that's why. That's interesting. I guess it's just interesting. It's knowledge.
Yeah, and that's the thing is I try to very rarely ask why when I'm doing these sorts of things, because it's just sort of, again, like we talked about, sort of recognizing music as having its own intrinsic value. I tend to think of music theory as having its own intrinsic value, and just sort of like, these are interesting and these are cool because they are, and because like, look at all the cool stuff, and not necessarily turning that into like, oh, and you can use this to make music in this way, which is often why I don't include as many examples as people want me to. And they're like, oh, show me like what this scale would sound like in a piece. And I was like, no, that's not the point. That's not what I'm trying to do here.
Well, it's all, Oh, sorry.
No, that's the one thing I like about Collier's work is I had a professor in college who has since retired, and he came up with this thing called a clock diagram, which I made a video about.
And
it's a really great visualization tool for kind of wrapping your head around set theory, because a lot of set theory can be really, really out there. And the cool thing about watching Collier's videos is that it's really, really dense, and for me it necessitates me visualizing a clock diagram, which is really nice. Like, he talks about negative harmony. It's like, that's really complicated. Oh, it's an inversion on the clock diagram. Or like, you know how a minor chord is an upside down major chord. It's like, you just draw your line right there. It's like, aha, I get it. And so it's cool to see something out in the wild that's getting used that needs that tool, that I kind of had to like keep in my back pocket for a while.
Yeah. And it was like when I did the negative time signatures video, like which was a lot of fun. But I got like people sending me all these cool examples of like systematic backmasking. Like there was this one album that the Homestuck people made, or like someone they worked with made to go with the story. That Homestuck is this long running webcomic, but basically there was this album that they made for theme music for a set of characters who were like time traveling chrono bandits or something. I don't know the details. I don't follow Homestuck.
Oh, and it's a crab cannon. Like the whole thing's like a crab cannon sort of from the middle.
No, it's not. It's different going forward and backwards, but you can listen to it backwards and it's a complete composed piece of music, and you can listen to it either way, and it's a different piece of music, but it's the same.
This is my
it's not the same.
for this Monday, by the way. So
sorry. Sorry.
No, I know it's funny. Like all these subjects. No. We can talk about it. But I'm doing something on a crab cannon. Yeah. Anyway.
Nice. But yeah, no. It's just when I made that, a bunch of people sent me like, oh, there's these cool real world examples, and it's just like if I hadn't asked myself that question, I wouldn't have seen these cool examples of it in action. But I didn't know that when I asked the question, you know, or when someone asked Adam the question and then I copied Adam, if we're being really technical. But
yeah, well, the only reason why I did a video on negative time signatures is because it was, you know, music theory clickbait. I would click on that thing. What is a negative time signature? And it brings up an interesting things like the subjects that we cover. We're interested in them, but like, how do we, like, there's something in the title needs to get other people excited about the thing we're talking about.
Selling,
yeah, it's marketing, dumb marketing.
Yeah, I had a big thing with that actually this week for the video that just went up like 4 hours ago.
The lyric video. I haven't seen that yet.
In the past, I used to do videos about poetry because I love sort of poetry theory as well. I think it's really interesting and it's really cool, and no one clicked on them, at all. They were like some of my worst performing videos at the time, and so I just stopped doing them for a long time. And this time, it's still talking about poetry. In fact, it's sort of more broadly looking at a couple different poetic ideas and looking at poetry theory and how it applies. But I didn't say that in the title. I framed it as about lyrics, and it is about lyrics. It's because lyrics are poetry set to music in a lot of ways. Like there's a very clear connection, but sort of just figuring out how to sell that in a way that people who are interested in my work will also be interested in is often difficult with a lot of this stuff. And that
You're talking about like prosody and stress and all that good stuff?
Yeah, accent patterns, like rhyme and like internal rhyme and stuff like that, and then imagery and sort of it's a more broad overview thing.
It was a
this
good
time,
video.
Thank you. I liked it.
I will click on that and
Nice.
watch it. I haven't had the time yet, unfortunately.
It's
but I
okay.
will click all that stuff. click the shit out of it. Yeah.
Oh god.
Yeah. I mean, I found that interesting. At least I need to watch it, but I found it interesting. Like we deal with music. We deal with the music-y music parts, but so rarely the lyrical analysis like will cover. I don't feel like I've ever really covered lyrical analysis ever, just because that's not really how I listen to music. Although more and more recently, it definitely is. And I don't know. I've had that discussion with a few other musicians that I know and like play with. Like, it's not something that we typically focus in on, which is interesting.
I mean, in the past, I've been widely dismissive of lyrics beyond the note that it is. Like, I'm thinking of the Earl Koenig, and most, like, aside from the story, which you could argue is just like a programmatic inspiration for that piece, the lyrics don't really necessarily add to the piece, aside from the way they're written, like when you have the different ranges representing the different characters, or how the left handle changed when it's the Earl Koenig as opposed to one of the other characters. But again, those are all programmatic aspects of the piece. In the past, whenever I've heard somebody talking about the lyrics having a significance beyond just how they're represented in the music, it makes the piece of work more of a gestalt. You know, it's greater than the sum of its parts, which is how I've heard a lot of people discuss rap and hip-hop, is that it's not just music, because to look at just the music is to ignore the lyrics, and to just look at the lyrics is to ignore the music, and it's a gestalt of the two together, and it's greater than the sum of its parts. So if you just break down like rhyming patterns or flow, you're kind of missing the big picture, you know?
Yeah, I was actually just talking, earlier today I was talking to somebody about this, like the gestalt of making music. I love that word. I love that you said that, because like it's a word that needs to be said a lot more, because everything is always more than the sum of its parts. We're not experiencing anything atomistically ever. Atomistically. Like, you know, when you listen to a piece of music, you're not listening to the drum groove removed from the guitar part, removed from the keyboard part, removed from everything. No, everything's hitting you at the same time, and it creates something a little bit more than just 1, 2, 3, 4. So, yeah, I mean, I just love that idea, the big picture, and can you even analyze the big picture without analyzing the smaller parts? Because generally we are analyzing the smaller parts. We're analyzing the chord progression. We're analyzing 1 going to 5 going to 1, but removed from like the sound of the instrument, which makes a big difference, because the overtones and the sound of the instrument are hitting you in a certain way that make a difference when 1 goes to 5 goes to 1. Removed from, you know, the feeling of like how that's feeling within the, you know, the chord progression, how, or like where it is in the measure. Basically what I'm trying to say is we need more big picture stuff, and I like big picture stuff.
Yeah, and that's something I've been trying to do with my analyses recently. It's just sort of, at least not like every single aspect. Like, I'm not a timbre theorist. I'm not like super qualified to talk about timbre theory or anything.
Klangfarben melody.
Exactly.
Melody.
Yeah, like at least I try and hold on to like the story and what the song is trying to say with the chords that it's like when I did the most recent one, I did Message in a Bottle, and if you look at the chords in the verse, like from my perspective, and apparently this isn't universal, but I view that song as played in E major, and the melody just walks back and forth between E and G sharp, and like I feel like it's very clearly trying to be an E major, but they never play an E major chord in the verse. Right. And I sort of tied that back into sort of, you know, because it's a song about a castaway, and the one chord is the home chord, and the chords can't find their way home, and trying to tie that back to that bigger picture of what the story is. And apparently some people hear that song in C sharp minor, and I don't really see that, but, you know, I would, whatever works, but that analysis is subjective, but...
Yeah, well, the lyrics are fascinating. Like, okay, so there's one thing that I've been wanting to talk about on my channel for a while, but I guess I'm going to talk about it here right now.
This is on your channel. It counts.
Nobody tell anybody. There's a song by Cole Porter called I Love You, and it was written on a challenge, like as a challenge, to see if Cole Porter could write a song using nothing but like starting every phrase with the phrase "I love you," without making it feel trite, because like "I love you" is such a trite like throwaway sort of like phrase. And so he brilliantly made it about saying the words "I love you" and how difficult it was to say that. And he always puts the phrase "I love you" on a descending major seventh, which is a very different. I can't sing it really because I'm not a singer that well, but to sing a descending major seventh is really really tricky. He puts it on several different descending major sevenths. The first is the descending major seventh from the 5 in the key to the flat 6 in the key. And the next is the descending major seventh from the 3rd of the key down to the 4th of the key.
Jesus, this guy's got a range.
Yeah, and I mean it's a pretty intense like song. It's a but I thought that was brilliant, taking the lyrics, making it difficult to actually sing the words "I love you" about a song, making it difficult to say "I love you." Okay. And it's phrased, and so this is just there's all kinds of these things in Cole Porter's music where the lyrics and the music are put together like this, and this sort of like brilliant back and forth. And one of these things that, of course, when you analyze it, you're like, "Huh, that's cool." But like, the question is does that actually add to the gestalt of it? Like, are people actually feeling that? Maybe, I don't know. But I love that connection. I love those little connections in the lyrics, and there's a bunch of them, like in like American Tin Pan Alley songs where they're like these really clever like lyrical connections to the melody.
Like, but, if I'm not mistaken, isn't Maria at the halfway point in West Side Story, and the critical interval there is a tritone?
Oh, that's interesting. Maybe, yeah. I didn't know that, but that makes sense.
I heard I can't remember who from where, but Beatles tunes. Someone analyzed a bunch of Beatles lyrics and found that like the words "heart" and "home" and lyrics like that like overwhelmingly fell on the tonic of the key melodically.
Oh, that's interesting.
I feel like stuff like that definitely must contribute to how you experience a piece of music, even if you don't realize it when you're listening to it.
Yeah, I think that a lot of songwriters are very conscious of that, like the feeling of certain words on certain. Yeah. Also, just like the vowel sounds. Like vowel sounds are very important when you're creating a melody. Like certain vowel sounds really make a difference, and which is why like the U.S. national anthem is really poorly set to the lyrics, because like "Land of the Free" is like the highest note,
the hardest vowel.
Free. Like to sing a high note on "free" is just like ugh.
Also,
sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
Bombs bursting in air. It's like the weirdest prosody ever. Anyway.
So many consonants in a row there. God.
Bombs bursting.
Yeah. Jesus.
Bombs bursting.
Bombs bursting. Like as a singer, like what they would teach us to do is like if you have to sing like a word that has an E, like a really because it's a really tight vowel, like E. Like it's so if you have to sing like a really high note on that vowel, what you do is you just sing A instead, and people will assume you sang E, and it'll sound basically correct. Again, it's close enough, and it's so much easier.
Yeah, like in a lot of love songs, instead of baby, it's bay.
Yeah,
baby.
Right?
Yeah, baby. It's also like and I've done this also on my channel, like analyze Ableton Live has this Fourier transformation thing where you can see like the harmonics of like each of the vowels, and is like the most neutral. There's like just very, very flat, very open, and then there's like E, which has like a strong fundamental, but then like no middle harmonics, and then a lot of higher harmonics. So it's like this very empty sort of sound to it. I find that sort of like the harmonic content of vowels is really fascinating to me, because that actually you're kind of analyzing it like an instrument. Really like an instrument, like spectral analysis of the human voice is something that I like. Yeah. And I guess maybe it's useful or not, but here we go. The intrinsic value of
everything's
knowledge.
useful, But yeah, no, I think it sort of comes back because like a lot of, as I'm sure we're all aware, a lot of how people process music isn't conscious necessarily. There's a lot of subconscious stuff that you'll hear and you won't notice that it makes a difference, but it makes a difference. So like, I think that in a lot of these cases, these things do matter. You just may not know.
Yeah, isn't that the case with all art, though? Like, you don't need to have the analytical understanding of it, but it works for some reason. And it's nice to be able to break down why it works. But, yeah, I mean, I think all of that adds to the whole thing.
Yeah,
It
there's
depends.
this-
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Sorry,
like
I don't mean to interrupt. My bad.
No, go for it.
There's a my comp professor in school introduced me to the red letter media analysis of Star Wars. The like
that's
the like
that's cl-
4-hour analysis
that's a
of the Star Wars
classic.
prequels.
Yeah.
And at one point, Mr. Plinkett says, "You didn't notice it, but your brain did." I think.
Okay.
And that's
Yeah.
that's why my professor remembered it, because he's like, that's such a great way to put it. Whenever you do one of these little musical tricks, right? It's like, you won't notice it, nobody in the audience will notice it, but your brain will.
Excuse me. Well, I was just doing a preliminary research for a 12-tone video. Not about your channel.
yeah. Well,
but,
I mean,
but that'd be
flattered,
great.
Adam.
That'd be like a history of YouTube channels. That's gonna happen, by the way,
Yeah.
at some point in our lives.
I already found
yeah.
a dude who was reviewing other people's review channels.
Oh my god. Well,
Yeah,
Quentin reviews. Anyway,
No.
I watched
yeah.
it.
Very small channel.
But yeah, there was an interesting paper I was reading about, like, can the brain actually follow the serial process of going through the 12 tones and like stratifying it across different instruments and actually applying a 12-tone serial technique where you're using all 12 notes and blah blah blah. And there was an interesting paper saying that no, you can't. I'm not sure if I agree with that or not, but they came up with these two ideas: the idea of compositional grammar and listening grammar. In other words, the things that go into actually making a thing, and then the things that go into receiving that thing. So I found that idea. I just read about this the other day. I found that like really made a lot of sense to me, because the ways that we perceive music are going to necessarily be very different than the ways that we create music. And I don't know. I just thought that was such a cool thought, and something that we don't really appreciate as much. Like, the analysis is all about how we're listening to music, but sometimes it's also about how we put together the music. And I think it's an important distinction to make between the two of them. But yeah, anyway, that's the you didn't hear it, but your brain did. Although, yeah. Anyway, yeah. Do I see a
that's really
pile of
interesting.
spare change on Adam's couch? Sorry, I just looked over.
Is there?
No, there isn't. I would gladly go grab it, though.
Can it be valid to call a piece of music too simple to be good? Oh man, this is kind of like that's a really great question, but it kind of ties into what makes good music good.
yeah.
I mean, I'd say Philip Glass's music is too simple to be. No, I'm just kidding.
Shots fired!
It's like a glass fight.
No, that's just a minimalist composer I never connected with. But I do
Really?
I do enjoy some of his stuff, though. But
How come?
Koyana Scott C is amazing. I don't know. It's just like, you like certain things and you don't like certain things.
Huh.
Never got into Philip Glass. Steve Reich, on the other hand, like Steve Reich.
Was that short ride in a fast machine?
That's John Adams.
That's John Adams. No, yeah.
That is some cool stuff.
That's a good piece.
Yeah, I like that.
piece.
How many genres have been called three chords and the truth? Isn't that a punk rock thing?
It was originally a country thing. I looked this up because I was mentioning it in a video. This is actually on my Can Music Be Good video, which ties back to the thing that I was just saying.
Yeah.
But country was originally country, and then it got applied to punk and some rock. I don't have a list, but I know that that's the basic history of that phrase. Is that it was
interesting.
some country music reviewer who called it that, and then the punk movement was like, hey, that's literally us too, so let's do that. So yeah.
Apparently it's also a song by Chase Rice. Didn't know that. That's interesting. Cool. Other questions? Is folk music such as Irish trad or bluegrass more boring to listen to than jazz or classical? Is it more, as it is more melodically driven than harmonically? I feel like a lot of these questions, and a lot of the questions that we get a lot, just maybe because we talk about it, is like, is music good? Like, what is good music? I think that's just like the question that,
I mean, comes down in large part on that one to enculturation. I'm actually planning to do a video on Irish trad music soon, because my cousin just got her master's in ethnomusicology, doing her thesis on Irish trad music, and I want to talk to her about some of her work. and do a video on that. So that'll come when I bother to set that up and do the, it's no promises on timing there. But like I do have talked with her about doing that at some point. But like I said, it's enculturation. It's what you grew up with and what you're used to.
Sorry, real quick question. Oh, sorry. No, somebody's mentioned the band Low High, the band I love them. Yeah, I've played with them before. I've opened for them. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that because Low High is a fairly local band, I think. Anyway, sorry. What were you saying, 8-Bit?
I have the worst memory on planet Earth. Oh, no, I was saying, I think that we obviously it's like, it's easy to say like, oh, who can say what is objectively good? That's not really a thing.
Yeah.
If you define the term, however you define the term good, it brings up an interesting question because like, jazz, or some, I shouldn't generalize, but some jazz is definitely more complicated than some, whatever, traditional Irish folk music or whatever. And I know that doesn't make it better, but like I read a book by Jerry Seinfeld on just like, I think it was a biography kind of, it's been a while, but he was talking about stand-up comedy and how to perform stand-up comedy. And he was talking about, he gave this analogy of like, it's like audio, and if the chasm's too wide, people are going to fall in and die. And if the chasm's too narrow, it's not going to be exciting. You can just step over it. That's not interesting. You know what I mean? Or like a roller coaster, like a kid's roller coaster is boring if you're not a kid because it's not. It doesn't.
I love kids roller coasters.
All, you know what I mean? Okay. I stand corrected.
I like the idea of them. I feel a little cramped in them, but I like the analogy. That's a good one.
Yeah. No.
But
so I don't know. There's definitely something to be said for that. It depends.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I mean, I like the idea of there being of complexity bringing something valuable to the table, but it doesn't always have to be. And it always feels like a non-answer to say that, but I like the idea of objective truth in music, even if it is impossible to quantify. If it's like there is an objective truth, it's just we can never see it because our perspective is too narrow all the time. That's my attempt at doing that. It's sounding, sounding important.
For me, I don't think you can really get good music, but you can get effective music, right?
That's a good way of saying it.
It's like a really arrogant way of putting it by just like swapping around the goalposts. But instead of trying to ask yourself like, is this good or is this bad? Think of it as, is this music effective at what I want it to do or what it wants to do or what the composer was trying to do? So, I'm thinking of like Giant Steps. If you're trying to explore a complicated music idea, you're going to create a complicated piece of music, right? And then you kind of ask yourself, how effective was this at exploring that idea, addressing it, and maybe even answering a question?
That's a great way of putting it.
So if you like Irish traditional music and that piece of music is trying to answer a question from a specific traditional Irish perspective, and it's using traditional Irish music in a traditional Irish way, then that is an extremely effective piece of music. And so to that extent, you can argue, is that piece of music better at answering its question than Coltrane was at answering his? And then you start having a really interesting conversation.
To bring it back to our pop music is terrible and music literacy is down, pop music is good dance music most of the time. And it answers its own question. It is very effective at getting people to dance.
Well, pop music is good because it sells records, right? Because that's the Billboard 100. It's all about selling, right?
And that's true. That is also true. But it sells records because it's good at being dance music or being back. I mean, there might be different goals too. It doesn't have to be one goal that the music sets for itself or people use the music for. I'm not going to always dance to pop top 40 dance music, but if the situation arises where there is top 40 dance music playing and I'm in a social situation where that's encouraged or whatnot, the music is going to do its job very well. Mm-hmm. I like that.
Definitely not going to dance to Giant Steps.
Not with that attitude, you're not.
You, my friend. Has anybody ever seen the Giant Steps, but it's It's in C. It's somebody auto-tuned Giant Steps to just a C major triad.
Oh my god.
That was such a meme at my university when I was in school.
It's such a good one.
Oh.
Oh,
So
I need to
also
look that
the Bee Gees Giant Steps. Have you heard?
my favorite. Giant Steps, but it's in 5-limit just intonation.
That sounds horrible.
It sounds like
really
physical
bad.
anguish.
So painful.
It's so bad. It's so great, though. I love it. Yeah. Man. Technical memes are amazing.
Yep.
Cool. Adam, do you know about Leo P? If so, if you approached his music, yes, I went to school with Leo P. He's a bari sax player that dances around and is really good at bari sax.
Nice.
Got musicians who have like wind players who dance around scare the crap out of me. Because every time they do, I'm just like, you're gonna fucking fall. You're gonna fall. And every time I see a marching band, it's like one of you's gonna trip. One of you's gonna slip and trip. And it's gonna be awful.
But very funny though.
Imagine
very
if it's the
viral,
tuba. That would-
Yeah. Ugh.
Yeesh. Don't fall with a tuba. That's my advice.
Uh,
I don't
there's
know.
a-
I know how to pronounce tubas. Don't worry.
There's a Woody Allen movie where I forget what movie it was, but he plays marching cello, and he's just like he has a chair and he's playing cello, and he moves the chair forward. And he moves the chair forward.
Oh my god.
It's really funny.
I feel like you could just do that with a wheel, though.
Yeah, you could definitely do
No,
that, but I think the visual is way
yeah.
funnier.
Can't you just get like a flag harness? Right?
Yeah, well, there's
And
people who
put the peg in that.
there are people who have like these body harnesses for cellos or like electric cellos. I've seen
Marching
that.
orchestra. We're making it happen, guys.
Let's do this.
All right, so let's start a GoFundMe. Marching
Go for-
orchestra.
Yeah. For no other reason, just to see if it happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're gonna
There's
have
no
them all being
utility.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's gonna be all ball gowns.
Well, it's for
and
its own
three-piece
sake,
tuxes.
Adam. We talked about this.
Yeah. It's intrinsic value.
It's art.
Art.
It's performance art.
Literally.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're performing and it's art.
Yeah.
That's great. Why is your humor so complicated to get? It's not very complicated.
It's just
We learn things and then we laugh about them. That's
Yeah,
basically what
it's just-
humor is.
yeah, laughing about the things you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Well, we've been doing this for like an hour and a half, guys. I think we laughed at the end, and I think that's an important place to end when we're laughing.
Yeah.
Most of these have been about an hour and a half, so I think this might be a good ending point. I think some cool stuff in this
Cool.
MUSICA Analytica.
Sweet.
Yeah, I had fun.
So
Can't speak
yeah,
for
guys.
the chat, but
Well, forget the chat. I'm gonna minimize it. Now it's just you guys, and yeah.
who needs them? They're just the
Who
ones
needs
who make it so we can do our job.
Yeah, forget you people.
Those idiots.
Those damn idiots.
I assume
keep
we're
watching.
offline now.
Yeah. Please comment, like, and subscribe.
Yeah.
You're all idiots.
And go subscribe to all of
The
us.
Slipknot of YouTubers.
Just JK in case the context is that we're very JK right now.
/S.
/S.
We love
very
all
/S.
but one of you. You can figure out who that is.
You know who you are.
Someone in the chat.
All right. Well, thank you so much, 8-Bit Music Theory, Sideways, and 12 Tone for joining me. And yeah, cheers, guys.
Cool.
See you later.
Take care.
I'm waving, but I don't have a camera. What the hell?
Yeah, I'll wait for